Mr. Orloff, yes.
Yeah, I think what you've been saying is fascinating, and as a playwright, I'm fascinated talking with other artists and other disciplines about the process of creativity. And, the whole thing about manic creation, I think of Václav Havel, who wrote one of his great plays in 2 days. And it was 2 days after he was released from prison from political persecution. And of course he had written the whole play without pen or ink or paper in his head. And so if you look at it just from the exterior, you say, oh, what a manic period. You know, he can be diagnosed. But what I'm interested about the left-right brain, when I was very young, I did substitute teaching in Massachusetts, in Boston, where I'm originally from, and the incredible difference between going in as a substitute teacher into a primary school class of 2nd or 3rd grade, and then going to 11th or 12th grade. And the essential difference was 2 questions. The kids asked why, and the older kids asked what. Yeah. And so my question to you is, I always thought of this as a problem of systematic pedagogical deficiency. But when hearing you talk, it seemed it also has a play on the actual development of the left-right brain in terms of what these children are able to tap and develop within their brain.
Well, I mean, Picasso's very famous for that quote of his about wanting to return, right, to the channel that the child has. That all his life, he said, it was to return to that place, to draw from that, to create art from that place.
And Einstein said imagination is more important than knowledge.
Yes. But you're right, the brain keeps on changing. All right through our life it keeps on changing. And then what happens to children who have to sit in a classroom 8 hours a day for all those months and are very heavily verbal, where you're fed that is the positive element.
You start teaching dialogically.
I don't know.
Yeah.
When do you get over the illness of it?
We are down to our last half hour, and we have several people here who have not been able to ask a question yet. So we encourage you to do so. The only wrong question is the unasked question. Please don't walk out of here. Well, I'm going to read something else then, because you folks did all this work, and we want our guests
to hear it.
So, as people were reading the book, of course, they read the conclusion, but they had gone through the part 1, part 2, part 3, and here they're on Charles Mingus, one of the Temperates, and after reading about Charles Mingus, this is what they wrote. This left me somewhat exhausted. I read a variety of emotions: fear, anger, sympathy, distress, hope, love, and sadness. Charles Mingus's life reads like improvisation itself. I felt that he visited and experienced an excess of emotions, experimenting so intensely to search and to find himself, his true identity, not only in his music, but his person as well. I thought how improvisation is the opposite of control, an element missing in Mingus's behavior. Perhaps the anger he owned and entertained was fear in disguise. Yet he was controlling with other musicians and those in the music industry. Was music pulling opposites together? Mingus knew what he needed and thus wanted, and launched himself into any territory where he could express and sanction every emotion he felt. When Mingus was not able to compose and be creative, he would spiral downward. His ego, albeit inflated at times, seemed almost invisible. His identity, his individuality, was once again bent out of shape. He identified with his musical abilities, not with himself as a human being. The racialist times caused him further strife. Mingus had to assert his existence. He was fighting for life. Mingus's sexual appetite and indiscretions could be viewed today as the behavior of a sex addict, searching for that high or distraction or escape from himself. Boredom could have been his nemesis. I thought of music as medicine. For Mingus, as the performer and composer, music, words, emotions, and notes was the first breath and the last. And his playing music encompassed the spectrum of who he was as a person, inventing techniques, and therefore himself as he went along. Sharing his music was requisite. How would you respond to that, Dr. Guzder?
I think that's a very thoughtful comment about, I mean, this whole business about the triggers in his life with his violent rage and the self-destructiveness in the acts of destabilizing when he did find an object or a person who actually had the capacity to care for him and love him, how frightening that would be to someone who has abandonment as the core issue. So that came up in the other comment. That is, if within ourselves, to be sad takes a huge amount of maturity. To be in this particular kind of depression has nothing to do with that. It has to do with pain, very raw pain. So there is a kind of fragility that we understand about from your story, this tremendous vulnerability and how it keeps on coming up, this explosive father that you feel in the back of his life who is never available really emotionally to him. And the substitute mother who is kind to him but isn't his real mother. And all these very complex mixtures of experience. And his brilliance of music, his accessibility to music, probably did save him. It made him seductive. People fell in love with him probably for his musical abilities and didn't see him. So, you know, and this is often very true of the exotic. That is, it's exotic to fall in love with an artist at a distance, and because you're falling in love with this thing that they can make. But who is the person who made that thing? You see, so there's a whole kind of theater going on here about, and a kind of prostitution also, and a cheating of ourselves that goes on in that. So you must produce it. You must produce the music or the object, and you must seduce the audience. You must produce the love of the beloved, and at what cost?
There's some, I don't know if you remember this story, and he did do that. To see him, there are many videotapes of Mingus performing live. It is something cynical to watch. I mean, it really is. You fall in love with that man, you know, and feel for him, you know, and want to go on the ride. And he's also incredibly brilliant, you know. He just had this.
That's Michael Jackson too.
Brilliant magpie mind, you know. Yeah.
That's Michael Jackson performing to be loved. But what was behind that was this terribly damaged child,
right,
who needed to be loved all the time, every single minute. Well, it's not possible.
And when the audiences would be acting up a little bit, there'd be some noise, some people chatting in the audience. He demanded stone silence in the clubs, you know. People chat and have drinks in clubs, but he was a kind of a madman about this. And if he heard somebody with a little glass, you know, tinkling in the ice, tinkling in the glass, he'd stop the show and he'd berate them and he'd insult people. Well, it sort of became part of his shtick, and part of what people showed up to see was to be insulted like that, and you know, yeah. And the time that he put record players of his music on the stage, and and had the jazz musicians sitting on stage playing cards, while their records played and nobody noticed. And this is the kind of thing that made him just want to throw his bass through the wall, and he often did, so don't not pay attention to me, that kind of temper, kind of insistence on.
And that kind of longing.
Yeah.
He's actually referred to as the angry man of
jazz. Yeah.
That's how violent the outbursts were. And the issue of control is quite significant, because in a day now we're getting used to the recording artist being also the producer and having their own label.
Right.
Mingus did something revolutionary in the mid-50s, and then again in the mid-60s. He has his own record companies, and he's African American. He's really a pathbreaker. His musical contribution considered incalculable. But you said something, Dr. Guzder, that I want to understand. You said sadness takes a lot of maturity.
Yes. Yes.
And you seem to say that in distinction to depression.
Yes, I do.
Could you elaborate?
Because if we think that, if we think about even that, when do we begin to have the capacity to be sad? Actually, is when we can contain some kind of a hurt and process it in ourselves and grieve and mourn and work through it. That's a pretty mature process. Deep melancholy or deep depression is something else altogether. It's like falling into a void. And when people are depressed, it's not a romantic experience. And they are really suffering terribly, and there's a lot written by.
Are you saying it's less mature?
No, I'm saying that there's a breakdown in the capacity to feel and think through it. That is, that you're to be mature is to be able to be aware and feel and think, this is reality and myself, and I'm processing it, and I'm guiding myself through, I'm navigating
I
it.
see.
But I'm not
Self-directed.
Yes, but I'm not navigating a deep depression.
Yeah.
I'm in a pit of something. So it's it's truly an illness. It's out of control. Whereas, ordinary sadness of life, look how many people have to endure terrible things and are able, either through their companionship or in whatever way, to build something where they're not destroying people.
Or socially, look at Japan. Look at the reaction in Japan to the tsunami and so on. And how would we react in North America with Santa? Like hysterical little crybabies, Amazing.
So you're saying that sadness is the ability to hold the hurt, to process it. So if I understand correctly, particularly in the example of Mingus and his violent outbursts, it's that he didn't have the critical mass to be able to hold the hurt, so he had to get rid of it because it was life-threatening.
Immediately, yes. Immediately. And if you took a cultural juxtaposing of Japan and its terribly formalized culture to, say, Jamaica and its post-slavery culture, you can see immediately there's a bit, but then we saw Haiti go through this devastation, and we saw great dignity on the street, but we also saw gangs and killing and the breakdown of society. So it's very interesting to think of it on a collective level. I don't want to go there, but but just sticking with sadness is a mature process. I tell my kids who are very explosive, when you can be sad, we'll talk, because that's really, I have to get them there. I mean, that's an achievement. I say to them that. I praise them, because this is much harder than exploding and spitting on people.
That's ironic, because sadness, at least in my head, is a negative value. I mean, when we, how much do we go to hear sad? It's sort of freighted, that word. But you're seeing this in a very positive value.
Relatively speaking.
Relatively speaking, yes. As a in terms of a psychological process, it's
because the individual's taking responsibility for what's happening.